Hello there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Thank you for joining this presentation. We are very happy to be here. I say we because this presentation is a group effort. I'm here to set the stage. Hopefully, I'll be quick because we have some fun stuff coming. Today, Nathalie, Kim, and I will be describing how we're using Hugo modules to solve consistency and standard initiatives in our technical publications group. Although we work in an authoring capacity, I think you'll find our talk interesting no matter your background or job title. We found Hugo modules to be magic, and we're here to explain why. I should point out that this presentation won't describe or show how to set up and use Hugo modules. Instead, it's about how we've used the functionality to suit our needs. First, a quick introduction. I'm Jeanne, and I'm a senior principal technical writer and content architect at Nuance Communications. In my job, I get to do fun stuff like integrate new tooling with Kim and Nathalie and implement the innovations needed to help support the authoring team and ultimately our customers to produce and deliver the best documentation we can. Nathalie, Kim, and I work on such initiatives together, and we have a lot of fun. The three of us are based in Montreal. It's a great city. Okay, so just a few words about our team. As I mentioned, there are primarily the three of us working on integrating Hugo as our static site generator. Then there's the TechPubs team, of which we are a part, which is about 15 strong. Over especially the last few years, we've been growing. We write for dozens of products, mainly HTML, not hardcover books anymore, thank goodness. And some docs are written in a proprietary help authoring tool, but more and more are being written in Markdown. We're advocates of the docs as code approach for those of you familiar with that philosophy. Okay, so 15 writers going on more, lots of different products, tools, probably too many. I could spend an entire session describing why we chose Hugo over other static site generators and why the previous static site generator we were using no longer fit the bill. Suffice it to say, Hugo and the theme we've chosen to base our docs on, Doxy, which is great for technical documentation. We can't thank the Doxy team enough for creating and continuing to develop such a fantastic theme. Both deliver a lot of the features we needed. Hugo particularly offers us the flexibility to build what we need. Our Hugo-based doc sets make use of variables for repeated terms like product names, conditions to show content one way for one type of user, another way for another type, archetypes or templates providing specific types of content, and even support sharing common content across projects. Let me give you a simple example of why it's important to share or reuse content in our TechPubs team. Imagine that 4 of the APIs we document use the gRPC protocol. If we're not careful, that could mean 4 different writers, each one working on a separate API, having to think of a definition of the gRPC protocol. Here are 3 examples from the same doc set. Check out the italics. Similar, but slightly different. Why put the pressure on each individual writer to come up with definitions of common content? Our goal is to write it once and use it in many different places. Software engineering has a similar mantra. Enter modules. Our first step, of course, was understanding just exactly what modules are. Here's the definition from the Hugo docs. Hugo modules are the core building blocks in Hugo. A module can be your main project or a smaller module providing one or more of the 7 component types defined in Hugo. Core building blocks, that's powerful stuff. Initially, we use modules to ensure a consistent look and feel across our doc projects. 15 writers, dozens of doc sets, and they all need to read and look like they're coming from the same organization. But we didn't stop there. This talk is entitled Going Wild with Hugo Modules. What made us go wild? Let's find out. Over to Nathalie, who will explain phase 1. Nathalie Laroche is also a senior principal technical writer. With a computer science background and extensive experience writing API documentation, she's our tools guru.
Thanks, Jeanne. Hi, I'm Nathalie. So let's talk about phase 1. In our first iteration of modules, we went through the contents of a typical Hugo project and identified the components that we thought should be the same for all projects. Now, I don't know if you've worked with tech writers before, but we're a very detailed-oriented bunch, and we really appreciate consistency. We have a pretty large documentation team, which means many products to document, but also a lot of common content. So we really wanted to centralize that common content, which would then be approved and updated as required by our styles and standards team. Okay, let's look at a typical Hugo project. In our case, the content that we wanted to centralize was first the archetypes folder, since we use it to create templates that we want all our writers to use. For example, we have a lot of API documentation, so we created a directory-based archetype for gRPC that writers use when creating a new API document. By the way, archetypes are a great Hugo feature. The next folder that we decided to reuse is the assets folder because it contains some of our overrides. As Jeanne mentioned, we use the Docsy theme, which we love. It's really, really great for technical documentation, but we made some minor modifications to it, such as putting in our own logo. The next folder that we decided to reuse is the layouts folder because it includes some theme overrides as well as shortcodes that we created for our needs. And I know I'm going to start to sound like a broken record, but shortcodes are a great Hugo feature. And finally, we have the static folder, which also includes some common overrides, such as the favicon. And in this first phase, we took all these files and we put them in a Hugo module, which we called very originally Hugo Common Modules. And if you've worked with Hugo modules before, you know that the next step is to configure your Hugo project to specify which Hugo module that you want to load or import. So let's look at how we did that. As you can see here, we created a module configuration file, and this file is called module.toml. We ended up breaking up the config.toml file into multiple smaller configuration files because we had a lot of configuration items, and we found that using smaller files made them easier to read and maintain. And by the way, breaking up configuration files into smaller files is a Hugo feature, and yes, I'm going to say it, it's a great feature. You can also see that we're using GitHub internally, so that's where we're pulling the Hugo common modules from. And we then mount the full 4 folders that we need, which are the folders that I just talked about in the previous slide. And we copied this file in all of our Hugo projects. So this was pretty simple, as you can see, and it worked really well. It worked so well, in fact, that we started feeling pretty proud of ourselves, and we thought, oh, okay, so if this was so easy and straightforward, maybe we can do even more with modules. And that's what Kim will show you now. So Kimberley Brown is a recent graduate with a Bachelor of Computer Science, and we're very lucky that she decided to join our TechPubs team as the dedicated front-end developer. Over to you now, Kim.
Thanks, Nathalie. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim. I'm going to first talk about how modules helped us to achieve project-specific branding. As you learned by now, creating the Hugo Common Modules as part of a global shared resource was a great starting point in identifying and structuring our common content. At the beginning of our Hugo journey, we had plans to push only one doc set to the Hugo framework. At the time, this meant we would be creating a CSS skin that would only need to be designed for one product. However, as most of you know, Hugo is pretty cool. The other writers on the team in charge of other doc sets were tuning in to see the progress we had been making with Hugo and really appreciating the speed, flexibility, and capabilities in terms of shortcodes that Hugo brings to the table. In short, this meant that we would need to be serving multiple products, and as you probably may have guessed, we'd be using modules for this. Similar to the common content, we knew that there was going to be common code. We first investigated all the elements that would be part of this boilerplate template and kept all that code in their respective files in the assets directory as part of the Hugo Common Modules. Next, we needed to come up with a way to build and deploy our doc set easily with different skins. We came up with a new directory called Project Specific, keeping in theme with our very original naming conventions. This directory, divided by product, houses their own proprietary images, SCSS, and any other files that are meant to be used as overrides. The code in these files include project-specific palettes, logos, landing page banners, and any other necessary theming elements that need to be changed from the global codebase. The files that contain the global codebase would then import the required project-specific SCSS files, depending on which project module we're building. When we build, we simply change the directory name in the module.toml file that corresponds to the module we want to mount, allowing us to deploy different doc sets with their project-specific styling. I'd like to demonstrate now how we were able to achieve this strategy. For those of you who are familiar with the Doxy theme, the original theme looks a lot like this. We hadn't made many identifiable changes to the theme besides using our brand logo and changing the documentation title. The color palette, the look and feel of the shortcode outputs, such as alerts and page infos, and the overall structure of the content was still obvious that it was going to be heavily based off of the original Doxy theme. Once we started looking at branding, and then furthermore project-specific branding, we were going to need some big changes to stand out. As I mentioned in the talk, we were first going to be using Hugo for only one of our products. So initially we had used the assets directory to contain all of the SCSS overrides we would need for that. Custom variables that are brand specific, changing the colors in the navigation, landing page icons, and anything other that needed to follow a strict style guide. Now, when you want to override files that are based off of the theme, you create a directory and file structure that is identical to the original. In our case, you can see here in our Hugo common modules that we have some SCSS overrides for things like the navigation, content, project styles, and variables. Originally, these files house the entirety of our SCSS overrides because they contain code meant for one product. However, as we were expecting to expand the number of products that would use Hugo, we wanted to find a way to create a boilerplate template that would contain a global code base that would share code across different products. Now, enter that directory I mentioned that was oh so cleverly thought up of called project specific. Right now we have two in here, Mix and Nuance. You'll notice in here that we'll want to mimic the original project structure by having an assets directory that contains SCSS and icons, and a static directory that contains favicons. The SCSS files have generic names because we want to import these files and include them with the global codebase. For example, see how this global codebase has color variables that can be used site-wide? But the Mix and Nuance project-specific files have their own proprietary color variables that need to be used. The global codebase files, when necessary, will have import statements at the top. These import statements bring in all the code from the project-specific directory that we're building, and override anything from the original codebase that has the same name. Pretty cool, right? Now, the reasons that modules have come very handy for this is because in the project that we're building, we can simply change the path and import the correct project-specific content that we need to build it with. Having it say Mix brings in the asset directory from that product, whereas when we change it to Nuance, it'll use what's in that directory instead. This all looks pretty fancy, but let's see what the output gives us. So, when we want to run, we just type in Hugo server, and we'll get a local host to view it. Oh, what an interesting banner there. That's top secret. We can't show you that. But you'll see here how it's using the mixed color palette that we have defined. Let's go back and, see what Nuance gives us. I simply change the name in the path, Nuance, and Nuance, save. And I should be able to refresh it and have a completely different look and feel. Now, this is what we really wanted to achieve when we were doing project-specific branding, and the modules have helped us a lot. As you saw from the demo, This is just the beginning of how modules have lent themselves to be extremely useful for our branding purposes. Now, as we proceed and enter phase 3 of our module journey, I wanted to bring you back to a vital point Jeanne had made at the beginning of this talk, the importance of content reuse in documentation. Being able to write it once and use it in multiple places. What we had accomplished with the branding made us realize that modules are going to be invaluable in achieving this. I said earlier that the HugoConf modules at a global level was a great way to separate the content that was going to be meant for reuse. Content reuse is not limited to larger procedures that may be used between doc sets, but it can be in how glossary terms are being defined. These definitions should be consistent, and it is critical that they remain standardized across our content. That being said, when writers would be working on their doc sets locally, the HugoConf modules would be downloaded as part of their local builds. The drawback to this was that these modules were being imported silently. We see the content as part of the build package when we run Hugo, but we can't see what the HugoConf modules is made up of in terms of our project directory. The output we got from the terminal was the only indication of what modules we were using in our project, but we didn't have any access to it. It satisfied the basic infrastructure content like distributing CSS, logos, and other similar files, but it fell short when we wanted to use content or reuse it and share it easily. Building a proper solution, we need to fulfill 2 technical requirements. First, the reusable content must be stored in a single central location that could be easily accessible. Satisfying this requirement would ensure that all writers always have access to the same content and they're also viewing the same content. Secondly, the writers must be able to have access to the files to see the content and reuse it as necessary. The solution we found: vendor modules. Using a module that is vendored will create a directory in your project that will allow you to see the contents of your specified modules as you're working. When writers want to reuse content in their writing, they can simply reference the local path, as the vendor modules behave as though the files belong to the current working project. In our case, because items such as the glossary definitions are part of the content directory in the HugoConf modules, we want to have access to that and make sure we add that in as part of our import mounts. In your module.toml, you're able to manually add in which directories you want added to your project. We made sure to add this directory as part of our git ignore to avoid committing it, since we only have use for it locally. This may not be the optimal approach, however, it was simple and it's been working really well for us. Now, let's be real. Technical documentation can be extensive, and they are often built in different sections, such as APIs, microservices, and other things that get pulled in together to produce the final doc set. Some of the components from these different sections are used in multiple products, and we needed to find a way of being able to access and reuse these larger components. The solution? Make the documentation for that component into a module, and then we pull that into the umbrella project at the right spot in our project hierarchy. For example, imagine a component such as a license server that is used in many different products. The license server documentation is stored in its own module, and then each project can pull it in where it fits into that doc structure. For example, a simple product may want the license server doc at the top level of the doc set, but a complex project might want this pulled in under a bigger requirements section. This can be easily done through the module.toml file. Let's take a look at how we were able to achieve this type of functionality.
Oh, hey again. Alright, so let's rewind a little bit to the beginning of content reuse. Modules being imported silently? What? I said that the HugoConf modules gets downloaded as part of the build process, but we have no access to the contents of it. This module holds all the vital common content that the tech writers should share. And if I don't want to rewrite a version of something that already exists, how can I avoid that? Let's take a look at this project here. I'm using the Hugo Common modules in this, but there's nothing in my directory that gives me access to it. It would be so much easier for me to reference content or glossary definitions if I could see what I want to reuse. I mentioned we wanted something that would be stored in a single central location that would be easy to access, and that all writers must be able to consistently view and have access to the same information. It would be really great if we could have something directly in our working project. Well, that's the beauty of vendor modules. I've already run the command to get them into my project, but you simply need to run the command hugo mod vendor. It'll create this vendor directory at the top, and inside here, I see that once silent module that was imported in, not so silent anymore. I'm able to view all the content inside that's meant to be used for reuse. Code snippets, procedures, glossary definitions. This is pretty great. Remember those components I spoke about? How documentation is built in many different sections? The module.toml file in this project is importing several of those components, like the Hugo Common modules and different gRPCs. Now, when I mentioned we can adjust where we want to place these components in our project hierarchy in the module.toml, it's simply done by specifying the target location in the import configuration. The source refers to the original directory that we want to bring it from, and the target is where we want to put it. That means we can modify lower or higher visibility for components, depending on the project. Now, let's look at some output. You can see here I have several of the components that have been imported, and they're located at their respective target locations. Even better, check out some of the content that I'm using as part of content reuse. See this tooltip here? We're actually referencing it from the Hugo Common modules. In the Hugo Common modules, I have reference here with all my glossary tooltips. There's a long list of stuff I don't want to rewrite, and this is excellent for content reuse. This is what I meant about how the vendor modules behave as though the files are part of your local project. I'm able to make a shortcode here with the glossary tooltip and reference something that's in a completely different module. This is really, really powerful. Content reuse has never been so simple, and we thank the vendor modules for this functionality.
As you have learned so far, modules have created a ton of value for us. We have been able to successfully apply archetypes and theme overrides, project-specific branding, and content reuse, all with the help of modules, and we're only just getting started. In the future, we will continue to look at the benefits of modules and hope to eventually move the entire Doxy theme over to one. Additionally, we are actively working on a series of dashboards that will be reading in the content of all the component modules we spoke about earlier. These dashboards will be for internal use for the TechPubs team to display all the common content that's being used. Think of it as a control room for all things documentation. Now, I'd like to invite Jeanne back for our closing remarks.
Hi there again. Thank you for attending our talk. We hope we've inspired you to check out Hugo modules. And if you're already using them and have additional ideas for us, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy, of course, to answer any additional questions you might have. Bye for now.